This is Undeniable 22, showing dozens of examples why MSU diversity training will be tainted and a bit about the ASMSU presidential candidates. So first, I hope you had a happy Easter, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ and also spending time with family, whether together or separate in this time of the corona pandemic. Got a lot of stuff coming up in this episode, several examples of just, bias throughout the year that will show how this new upcoming training that they're proposing will not be fair or equal. And also, MSU student government, ASMSU, is moving towards elections for their officers, which includes the president, which is very important. There are two candidates. It's finally a contested race, which is good to see. But more all coming up ahead in this episode, episode 22 of Undeniable with Sarah Kelly. This is Undeniable Sarah Kelly, here to highlight news and what was reported, things that weren't reported, and further information on indoctrination and leftist bias at Michigan State University. So as you've heard throughout the year in other Undeniable episodes or Morning Watch articles, MSU has and is pushing new mandated diversity training. And I've covered this extensively, throughout the year, just different examples back and forth of what they're doing. But they're really, especially with the new MSU's president, who's very leftist, he's really pushing on this, and we're looking at something for this fall. And so in a state news article on April 8th, leftist president continued to announce that the training would continue, but the plan, to enact it in the fall might be delayed. So he said, original plan was to have something ready by the fall of this year, and Stanley said, and I think this would be an online training. Initially, it would be mandatory. From there, we would morph into additional training that could take place in person for faculty, staff, and as well as students. And they're trying to get, different feedback from the community. So if you do see spots on the website, the diversity inclusion website, stuff like that at MSU, definitely give your input. They're trying, to use this information of input to examine the composition and success of MSU student body, faculty, etc., a more inclusive committee. They're sounding really good about this, and because they want to know, how could this training shape MSU's future, as they say in the article. So they do want to have a big impact. Interestingly enough, there is already a training for newly enrolled MSU students. So in this video, I'll highlight a bunch of examples, kind of showing, they're saying they're going to have this new training. They're saying it's going to be fair and equal. They're saying, it won't be tainted, and obviously it will, because there's dozens of cases already just this year where it's shown that MSU's administration, faculty, whatnot, has repeated, bias towards certain sort of values and students. Obviously, they're probably not going to admit it lightheartedly, but it's here. And so about this trend I already have. So Morning Watch article, they'll all be cited in here. But last September, it said, required for all newly enrolled students, the videos are part of the university's diversity and inclusion e-learning to encourage inclusion and prevent students from feeling othered. It's up by the MSU Office of Inclusion and Intercultural Initiatives. So in this training, the first video focuses on the classroom and really calls out, white male students for being oblivious to diversity and their privilege. It talks about microaggressions, positioning students of a racial minority to act as a spokesperson for their race in classroom discussion is unconsciously expected, and that's a microaggression. It further cites it is often hard to analyze and name these privileges in intellectual spaces, because in intellectual spaces we realize that privileges just based on color are really not a thing. And I'd say that the presupposition and continued belaboring that there are just further increases divided race relations in America. So these videos pretty much sum in this line: minoritized students, but also students who come from positions of privilege, or we need to be very diligent in helping students both examine their privilege and targeted identities and so forth. There could be fair and partial training, no doubt, and it could be, actually about different cultures, learning about different perspectives, and it could be relatively fair and balanced and a good opportunity, roundtable discussions, stuff like that. It could be good. But unfortunately, there are several concerns showing MSU's partiality. So, first of all, recent, coronavirus PC culture. So they recently, Morning Watch has covered several incidents. One where MSU is calling out, jokes and memes that are intolerable, about the coronavirus. Then another about, an email stating, just to call it the novel coronavirus or COVID-19, but nothing else. So, obviously, like, as the president said, or other people, like the Chinese virus or the China virus, we can't say that. And also, in one of the statements that they were supporting by a coalition of Asian groups, said, even just the idea that this may have been manufactured in a Chinese lab, that's not good. That's discriminatory. So I'll stop about the coronavirus, and I'm sure there might be even more as we continue through, this pandemic. In addition, encouraging students to go to an anti-American film, where they had this panel. By the way, the film was called The Great American Lie. But in this panel, it also said, there were some professors there, and they said, they actually explained like how they use their own classes to, further social justice and equity. In addition, there was, obviously in January, we've had an undocumented student's website created, where one of the actual goals of the website was to reduce apprehension. And it said, provide resources for all undocumented. And the Morning Watch reached out to the this MSU spokesperson, and she actually said that, this would include non-citizens. MSU's not really too worried about that. So in theory, there could be, illegal immigrants here that are getting resources from, taxpayers or whatnot, and they're not even supposed to be here. And MSU kind of turned an eye, didn't really see a problem about that, didn't say much about it. It was it's not good. And also they have, with this whole multicultural building thing that's been going on, there's been a lot of students pushing to have, a undocumented student center in that area. In addition, just recently, a couple months ago, there was one of the directors over at the MSU Extension in the College of Agriculture. He was actually just blasted by his peers, professors and faculty, for even just suggesting that there might be risks associated with the, having all gender bathrooms. And it was actually even more humorous because he actually even had a conference up in, actually, Traverse City it was. They had an MSU Extension conference there, and he was one of the people managing it, and he actually had all gender bathrooms put in there. They changed the signs on the regular bathrooms, male or female, just said, all gender, stuff like that. It was a conference. They really wanted to be, tolerant, obviously. So they actually had people, introduce each other and give their pronouns. And for people to use these all gender bathrooms, professors, faculty, whatnot, whoever that was there. And right before the event, he sent an email just, trying to highlight, about the event, what's really happening. And he mentioned his email that just mentioned a thought, of people that might be too kind of concerned with these all gender bathrooms. And he just was outlining like how it might be risky, but how, really this is an important step forward, inclusion, whatever. And just for even suggesting that there might be risks, he was just blasted by his, his peers, and he had to apologize. Very, very, just very sad situation. In addition, the Morning Watch did a great article analyzing 3 classes. We analyzed several, different more social science type classes. One of them was sex, gender, and sexuality, SOC 216, race and ethnicity, SOC 215, and literature, cultures, and identities, IH 217. And we found that these classes really just slam America's profoundly racist and white supremacist. And interestingly, these classes, these professors demanded no recording. Obviously, we recorded because, you know, we're not using it for intellectual property. I'd argue there's not much intellectual property in those recordings anyways. But these classes are, you know, this professor saying, you know, you about your masculinity, like go find a book on feminism, like do your work, you know. He said, watch a documentary, hike yourself to the library, sit down, start reading magazines, journals, educate yourself about these issues, rather than expecting people who have been historically been subordinated in the first place to assume the responsibility of educating you. And, you know, they're reading articles by Vox, you know, showing how the protesting the anthem is actually, you know, so much more important, all this stuff. And in actually one of the classes, the SOC 215 and 216 had recorded readings which confront racism, sex, gender, and sexuality. Here are some of the titles of these books. White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About. All the Real Indians Died Off, and 20 Other Myths About Native Americans. Race and Racism's A Critical Approach, How Life Assigned Life with the Gender, and then How to Be an Anti-Racist. And so students have to read these books, and obviously, you know, these books are very one-sided. And one of the teachers, Dr. Fox, was actually recorded saying, locking your doors in areas like Detroit is racist. We live in a profoundly racist society. Another saying that different races are predisposed to health risks is ridiculous because it's probably from the stress of racism that's causing their hypertension. Don't even know what's going on there. Discussing microaggressions and race, Dr. Fox stated, white women clutch their purses real tightly, which is a microaggressions. And then she further stated she could go on about how awful white women are. You know, she obviously made the statement, we live in a profoundly racist society, oppression is historical and normalized. And obviously, you know, another professor in these classes, which are very social sciencey, you know, which tend to have a lot of leftist leaning thought in them, unfortunately. Dr. Pryor said, you know, gender is a social construct, you know, and promoted the idea that children would be better off growing up without a gender, but she also contradicted herself, further proposing young children starting at age 5 to change their gender. And she assigned the book, Assigned Life with the Gender, discussed how people should not, you know, refer to your children as boys and girls, but should change pronouns in kids' books to make everything gender neutral. So as you can see, these three classes are, you know, obviously very one-sided. You know, there's very little thought of, you know, at least coming from the professor down, there's very little diversity of thought. No matter how they like to say they're, you know, inclusive and diverse, at those classes, all three, especially saying there's no recording and they're very strict on that kind of stuff, that really further sets red flags. In addition, in November, there was, in one of the hallways here at MSU, there was a bunch of placards set up along the hallway discussing, you know, how really we shouldn't be celebrating Columbus Day, it should really be Indigenous Peoples Day, you know, how he just started the genocide of Native Americans, how he didn't really hit America. And they had all these placards also cite, you know, a bunch of the large or famous, you know, anti-Columbus Day / anti-American protests that have gone on. And so there's not even, you know, one hand where it could be like half the placards are saying, you know, why there shouldn't be a Columbus Day, et cetera, and the other half are saying, you know, why there should be. You know, it's just one-sided. And furthermore, it's very, you know, inaccurate. You know, he didn't start the genocide. He didn't even, you know, start this mass genocide or do mass genocide. You know, if we look, you know, just real quick, he had 3 voyages. And in the first one, you know, obviously, yes, he did, you know, try to take some natives back, and he had a bunch of British ships, you know, as captives, which obviously not good. But once they got to England, they were, you know, treated as royalty. You know, it was actually very interesting how they were treated afterwards. You know, we kind of get the first part of the story, but no one ever tells us the other half. And then the second voyage, you know, they had set up I forgot what the island was now, but they set up, you know, their encampment on one of the islands there, and they befriended one of the local tribes. who had warned them about, you know, cannibals living nearby there, wherever this was in the Caribbean. Um, and then the opposing tribe came through and wiped them all out. You know, it destroyed their encampment, all that stuff, and really hurt them. And so Columbus and his men, and with the Tanos tribe, that's who it was, who they'd made an allyship with, they went into that other village, and you know they kind of returned the favor. They, you know, took their stuff, they looted through there, they went through there, and they actually freed a bunch of this tribe, the cannibals, had been capturing other people from other tribes and, you know, keeping them locked up, especially women. They were just locking up, using for, you know, sex slavery and stuff like that. And they were, you know, they went and freed them. And then the third voyage, and so Columbus's story is not what these posters are indicating, and it's not even a fair representation, nor is it, you know, they're not even at least trying to say, you know, maybe we have this half of the poster say, you know, why there should be a Columbus Day, and the other half why there shouldn't be. There's just one-sided. In addition, MSU has placed white privilege guides. This was back in November. They're still up, but that's when we reported on it, the Morning Watch. All the articles are up there. They're placed in Acres Hall, also some in Wells Hall. The board included, you know, check your privilege scorecard. And identified privilege categories include white, male, Christian, and able-bodied. What they define as privilege includes unearned access to social power based on membership in a dominant social group. And the board reads, if you don't have to think about it, it's privilege. And these boards and these flyers are actually from Everyday Feminism, Feministastic.com, and Feminist Peggy McIntosh. So slated, one-sided. And they said, knowing your privilege is not something as a source of guilt, but as an opportunity to learn and be responsible, so you may work toward a more just and inclusive world. You know, they're always working towards that impossible utopia. In addition, you can be privileged but still have a difficult life. Wow. And so then this might, you know, when people, in addition, people think having privilege can be an easy life, and they feel personally attacked when people point out their privilege. And so then the board also likes to clarify, you know, to them it feels as if someone is saying they haven't worked hard or endured any difficulties. Further, there was cultural appropriation guides in October, right around Halloween, you know, how to not be racist in your costume. One of the examples they've used is two people, the same guy. In both pictures, he's in a taco costume, but in one of them, he's wearing a sombrero. The picture where he is in the taco costume and sombrero, that one's labeled racist. The one where he's just in the taco costume is labeled not racist. How that even fits, I don't know. But that is from MSU. It's on the official MSU posting boards, and so they've done this multiple years. Really, and we've talked to a university, and they've admitted, yeah, we can't actually enforce any of this. It's obviously a huge breach of constitutional rights, but they're just trying to educate people. You know, always the do-gooders. Also, there's been, you know, several panels of, you know, guest speakers, MSU speakers obviously at the university, but one of them was very just, you know, anti-white and very anti-Trump. They went out and were very at the panel. Trump and whites were slammed for spreading white nationalism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. The university land was cited as stolen, and an apology statement was read. This panel was in September. It was called Building Community, Resisting Hate. You know, the speakers talked about the dangers of white nationalism present today and the importance of building community to repel white nationalist threats. And, you know, this was all cited with, you know, rural communities, Trump supporters, you know, whites. So very one-sided, slated to serve one agenda. And this falls into another one of MSU's great campaigns, their microaggressions campaign. They have these boards across campus, you know, citing microaggressions, which obviously to the average American who probably doesn't know, because it's a new term, but it's a, you know, being offended by a certain set of words or language. So it further defined 3 microaggression categories: micro insult, micro invalidation, and micro assault. and real importantly, so if microaggression just generally is being offended by, words or whatnot, using these 3 words, the biggest one that I think has a big problem is is the one that's micro assault. Because, when we think of assault, we think of, someone getting punched, we think of being someone gunned down on the street, we think of, horrible things. And usually an assault, it's self-defense, you have a full right to defend your life. And so saying this is a micro assault, being hit by words or getting offended in a certain way, that kind of invokes what would the response be? And we've seen how, people respond to protests today, how they respond to what Trump says, how they respond to, views that they don't agree with. And they respond to, anger and screaming and yelling and, shaving their hair off, all this weird stuff. And I think this is a result. So MSU obviously is promoting this. And they said this can be remedied, any of these microaggressions, by the bar method, which real smart stuff here, high academic standing stuff. The bar method, starting with breathe when you get in stressful situations, states to acknowledge what the other person is saying, whatever that means. Whether you're just listening to it, whether you say, hey, I acknowledge you're saying that, I don't know. And finally, respond to the other person. And it says the boards assure it will help conflict resolution in what MSU defines as hostile situations. So if we're at a university and they're defining, hostile situations as things you hear or see that you don't like or don't agree with, define that as a hostile situation and that's a micro insult, I think we've got a problem. Because at a university, you're not the exact opposite of a university. You're supposed to go into an area where you agree with everything and you're not challenged, you don't learn. That's not what a university is or should be. Fortunately, that's not what they are anymore. And also in August, we covered this extensively. Fortunately, this was it was training by MSU for staff workers, which I happen to be one over in South neighborhood, and so they were telling the staff workers, don't use sir or ma'am. They were very explicit on being gender inclusive, etc., etc. And the presenter actually said, who of you was raised to say sir or ma'am growing up? It's about a third of the room probably put their hands up. And then she was like, well, now we don't want to be doing that. That's not where we are right now. And actually, they call the gender specific triggers, because they get triggered over this stuff. Being called sir or ma'am, which used to be a proper form of etiquette. In addition, they had an identity wheel, which the wheel signifies how people identify their memberships to social groups. So again, back to something previous talked about, they want people to have all these identities to ally you into what group you're in. It's really splitting up and segmenting the population, if anything. It's not bringing us together. So, it can include race, ethnicity, sex, gender, sexual orientation, national origin, first language, physical, emotional, developmental ability or disability. It says age, religion, all this stuff. You're only composed of, the sum of the parts of the whole. It's really just leftist stuff. And so they concluded, the presenter concluded in this staff training, students on this campus from minoritized groups are not feeling, included or victims of oppression systems. And, most students we interviewed from that training said, hey, sure, I can understand there's some concern, but is this going too far? And obviously some were really in support. So, trying to finish this off, I could probably talk a lot more about this, and there's a lot more examples too. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So there's a dozen or so examples I covered here, and within those there's much more. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, showing how repeatedly, time after time after time after time, MSU has shown a certain regard for a certain set of values and a disregard for another set, and a certain set of inclusion or allowing the free expression of certain values in the the not so much the other side. And in addition, it's not just if they're letting people speak or not. It's, what are they saying every day, all the time? It's one set of values, it's one set of opinions, it's one set of beliefs that they expect, through boards, through trainings, through more training, and through professors and classes for us students to hold. It's not a university. It's because it's not a place where you're supposed to be challenged and you're supposed to question. You're supposed to actually find critical truth, not subjective feelings and identity wheels. So there's that. There's a dozen or so. They're from articles on the Morning Watch website. Just go through. If you want a certain one to pull up or you need more information on one, let me know. I can try to find it. It's on the website. Make sure you subscribe. And just real quick on the ASMSU candidates. So ASMSU student government is having elections this week for the president and the rest of the office of the president, which includes 5 vice presidents. So the 2 candidates for the ASMSU president are Bita and Dylan Catalano. So both these, both of them are obviously on the left. ASMSU fairly rarely ever gets people conservative in there, or especially on leadership. And interestingly enough, ASMSU very rarely actually has any outsiders come into the office of the president. Very few have ever actually gotten in. It's a very, they expect you to be a representative before, staff member, etc. So very few outside opinions even get in. Between Abita though and Dylan is much more, I guess, establishment type. He's been there a lot longer. He kind of has that mentality. You just kind of get that feel from him, from what he's done, from what he says. He likes to talk about his positions, what he's done. Abita, she's been a rep before, obviously, and she is familiar with the system. But she's perceived much more of an outsider. She's from Cameroon, actually. She's temporarily a student here. She's definitely an outsider. I don't think she's lived in Michigan as long as Dylan. Both have ample experience and knowledge of ASMSU, but definitely both are going to be promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. It's very hard. They're very close with the cores and cops groups, the racial and ethnic groups, which they'll need their votes for. But still, I think Abita's platforms and stuff laying out, stuff all over Facebook, obviously, definitely is more and explains herself a lot more. Dylan's more points are more general, etc. But she's definitely going to be promoting a lot of left-leaning diversity and inclusion initiatives. She's pretty much going to go off of, and this is a Morning Watch article actually, where the Cores and Cops groups have a 10-point inclusion plan, which includes things from the mandate diversity training to quotas of more diverse professors and faculty. I think there's like special housing too. There's more money for the Cores and Cops groups. It's really funny. Every time they think there needs to be a solution to a problem, it's always involves them getting more money. And so these 2 candidates, it's harder to tell who's going to win. They're both very similar when it comes down just at least policy wise. I think Bita will cater more towards leftist stuff with Cores and Cops, but both are it's like choosing leftist versus way more leftist. They're still both leftists. It'll be an interesting election. I think it's going to really come down to, if anything, it's going to come down to that. Is it want more of an outsider type candidate, or do we want more of that establishment? He's been here. He knows he might know better what's going on. Maybe that's, I think, what's going to come down to. It'll be interesting. ASMSU is holding fall elections because there's a bunch of open spots. And compared to last year, there was very few people running for GA seats. So that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see who takes the leadership. My former president, he's not president anymore once these elections are done. But this will be the first time since 2016 where there's actually been a contested race. So hopefully that helps, bring in more student input. It would be great to see a completely, open elections, where it's not, because right now just the GA representatives vote for the president rather than, the students of MSU directly. So that's an interesting note. Wanted to give you some insight on that. Definitely subscribe to the Morning Watch website, top right on the website, and also will be a box that pops up once you get on the website. So make sure you do that. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to stay up to date on the latest leftist indoctrination and bias at Michigan State University. Thank you.